everyone, and I'd like to say a hearty welcome to the 69 persons who have already joined on to this series that we are about to start. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today for this, our inaugural thought leadership series on cybersecurity in the Caribbean, which is aptly named the Caribbean Cybersecurity Series. I'm David Antonio Green, Vice President for Sales at Hitachi System Security, and I'm going to be the host for today's session. I'm joined by 5 thought leaders in cybersecurity and risk management who are going to take us through the topical issue of the impacts and threats of ransomware on Caribbean organizations. Now, we want to get your comments and questions as the presentations ensue, so please feel free to use the chat facility in the webinar facility that we're using to share your comments and to share your questions so that we can collate them and address them during the question and answer session, which is going to follow the last presentation. Now, at this time, let me introduce you to the thought leaders that I have present with me today. Anthony Sabero is a member of our board and the Chief Operations and Compliance Officer here at Hitachi System Security. Anthony's going to offer some opening remarks, and he will also offer his perspectives on cybersecurity from the perspective of an executive leader. Ken Hackshaw, who is the founder and president of the Caribbean Risk Management Academy and also the managing director and lead consultant at KHDC Limited, is going to give us his views on enterprise risk management and the importance for organizations. Now, when we take both Anthony's presentation and Ken's presentation, that's going to give us the perfect foundation for the presenters we're going to follow as we start to narrow the focus on cybersecurity and ransomware. Angus Smith, who is the head of the Trinidad and Tobago Cybersecurity Incident Response Team, is going to give us an overview of ransomware in the Caribbean. Ed Dabrowski, who is the Chief Operating Officer and Managing Partner at Cytelligence, a cyber breach response firm in Toronto, Canada, is going to help us understand just what exactly ransomware is and how it's impacting organizations today. And then finally, Daniel Godreau, who is an executive security consultant here at Hitachi System Security, he's going to give us a case study on the real-life impact on ransomware. Now, each presenter will speak for just about 10 minutes, and that will give us enough time at the end to do a Q&A after the last presentation. So with that being said, let's all settle in and enjoy what definitely is going to be an interesting session today. And at this point, I want to hand off to Anthony Sabero, our Chief Operations and Compliance Officer, so that he can give us his opening remarks. Anthony, over to you.
Thanks, David. And good morning, and thank you for attending the first program of our Caribbean Cybersecurity Series, Building Resilience. As David mentioned, my name is Anthony Sabero. I'm the Chief Operations and Compliance Officer at Hitachi System Security. And yes, I am a Trinidadian based in very cool Montreal. To say that the cybersecurity landscape in the Caribbean has shifted is indeed an understatement. As we have all seen in the headlines lately, the Caribbean is in fact under attack. There is more time to wait and see if network attacks might happen or chip away slowly at response plans if an attack were to occur. Organization, network, and data attacks are here. And the need to implement and develop a security program is in fact now. In fact, some of the statistics that we have seen in March 2020 alone, the incident of computer viruses in the region increased by 131% compared to 2019. And Angus would share a little more about it in terms of some of these statistics that he is seeing. Moreover, cyber attacks have been listed in the top 10 risks in the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report in the last 7 years. Of course, beyond cyber attacks, the impact of COVID-19 globally and to the Caribbean specifically has presented challenges unseen in this lifetime, at least for me. The regional lockdowns have reduced revenue inflows and suppressed spending, resulting in socio and economic conditions that can only start to recover unless, as a region, this contagion is stopped. Once this is effectively done, and from all indications, based on what we have seen, the respective Caribbean governments are on the road towards this objective, we believe the Caribbean must emerge stronger. visions and adoptions of country resilience and digital transformation as key components for social and economic recovery may not be possible with the same mindset of the past, or arguably the same mindset of the present. To achieve this requires people-centered leadership and bipartisan partnerships with key stakeholders to develop and execute an effective roadmap. This roadmap must be enabled by proper governance and accountability, risk intelligence, change management, and of course, innovative thinking. In spite of COVID, we see an exciting time ahead full of opportunities. The Caribbean is entering a digital transformation phase, if executed correctly, will position the region in line with other nations across the globe. Our company is very committed in empowering the Caribbean to navigate these uncharted waters by providing thought leadership and forming strong alliances with partners throughout the region. Hitachi System Security has been serving the Caribbean for more than 15 years, providing security and privacy solutions to many customers within the private and public sectors. We have also formed significant partnerships and support in the Caribbean, like the Caribbean Association of Banks and most recently, the Caribbean-Risk Management Academy. We are in discussions with other regional institutions towards this objective. We believe together we can build resiliency across cyber attacks towards a more secure and digital society in the region. And to this end, we have created this cybersecurity series to outline current trends within the community and offer options to develop the relevant resilience approach by sharing practical strategies and playbooks from thought leaders and practitioners in their respective fields. The main output of these series, ladies and gentlemen, is that we become more empowered as a region. So in closing, I ask you to be unabated, be open, and present your questions to the members of the panel to address all the concerns you may have on the topic at hand. David will be moderating an extremely knowledgeable panel, each member holding years of experience and a high-level specialist in their respective areas, each of whom we are deeply honored to be part of the first program of such an important series. I thank you. Please continue to be safe. And I now hand you back to David. David?
Anthony, thank you very much for those opening remarks. I couldn't help but notice a point that you made, that we cannot continue to use the same mindset of the past or even the mindset of the present. And the fact that risk intelligence is required at this time, which I think is the perfect segue for Ken. So Ken, can you share with us your thoughts on enterprise risk management and the role that it's playing with cybersecurity today?
Yeah, and thank you for Hitachi for both developing and rolling out these conversations. It's most apropos and very opportune. So I want to piggyback on something Anthony just said, and I think David mentioned it as well. Digital transformation may not be possible with the same mindset from the past and even the present. And so when one thinks of mindset, we are not talking technology here. Yeah. So I am a great advocate, and some folks may disagree, that the greatest risk to any organization is its people. It's decision makers, if you will. So if you think of this digital transformation, what exactly is that? And what is required of institutions to effect digital transformation? And what role does enterprise risk management play, to David's question and to my speaking point here with respect to cybersecurity? The words risk intelligence was also mentioned. And one could argue, though there are intelligent systems, i.e. AI, which probably is another conversation to be had, when we speak of risk intelligence, we speak of the people aspect of that. Yeah, what's the human capital risks to an organization with respect to cybersecurity? So what I would suggest is, you don't do cybersecurity, then do enterprise risk management. You don't do digitalization transformation and then do enterprise risk management. All of these risk disciplines are a subset of enterprise risk management. It falls under that umbrella. And I would dare say, when we speak of digital transformation, when we speak of people risks, risk intelligence, and mindset, those are considerations along the risk space that one must consider when looking at effective cybersecurity. So let me share with you something that I read in the coming out of the OMB department, which is the Office of Management and Budget of the US government. The increasing frequency, creativity, and severity of cybersecurity attacks means that all enterprises should ensure that cybersecurity risks is receiving appropriate attention within their enterprise risk management framework. So I would respectfully ask of the folks here in our institutions, is it that you're going to do cybersecurity as a standalone? Because that's the greatest, biggest, fire that we are faced with now. So let's get our cybersecurity space, up and running, or our technology environment, and so let's make sure. Or is it that it's going to be part of an overarching risk framework that will consider third-party risk, supply chain risks? Nice little segue. The SolarWinds attack. SolarWinds is a provider of technology services that was attacked, and the technologists on board could jump in and speak to that when their turn comes up. So they got attacked. Their applications got hacked, and then by that, the US government was impacted. So there was a reliance on a third party to provide certain technology services. That third party got hacked. So the question to you and your institutions are we managing our vendor and supply chain risks, which falls under the ERM umbrella, which rolls into cybersecurity, which rolls into your whole technology infrastructure? So one must consider what can happen to all of my dependencies, those critical vendors I supply, that supplies me with either a product or service. So those considerations must be part of an overarching enterprise risk framework. Anthony spoke of governance, leadership. Those things aren't, ancillary to cybersecurity. There must be considerations or aspects of the risks associated with ensuring that cybersecurity risk is properly managed. So you must connect the dots. And in the absence of that, things like SolarWinds, things like, I dare say, what happened with the Ransomware in Trinidad and Tobago, the 2009 hacking in Ghana. What are the things that could this have been prevented? Could it have been prevented? And so risk management or enterprise risk management, I oftentimes say, it's not a fait accompli. It's not a panacea. It's like an airbag in a vehicle. It's not going to prevent the accidents from happening, but what it will do is reduce the impact of when those accidents occur. So you are going to have attacks. Cyber folks are going to try to hack your businesses. And in my respectful view, the Caribbean is now a very high value target for these hackers. It's like a soft target. And I have said that the Ransomware was a test. How quickly can we get in? What are the hindrances for a hacker to come into the and this is a major financial institution. Also with respect, and it's in the public domain, so we're not prohibitive of speaking about that. I want to read to you something coming out of a Senate committee meeting on a failure of a major state organization. Outdated technology and poor data analytics. Adoption of modern information and operational technologies is low. Management and operational systems have not been modernized to incorporate and fully integrate new and cutting-edge technologies, which are being increasingly used by utility companies globally to reduce costs, increase efficiency, enhance customer experience. Across the organization, the systems and data architecture is poor. Data analytics is not voluntarily embraced. Technology risk is at a high priority. It should be a high priority. This is a cabinet appointed committee. That statement encompasses all of the risk pain points, not just technology, but technology, like risk, ought to be a denominator across all of your businesses. So again, I'm a huge advocate in having that risk management as a denominator, or ERM, and then a subset of ERM would be things like, obviously, financial risk, people and culture risk, which is critical, most important, technology, and under that you have cybersecurity. So it must be aligned, risk management and cybersecurity must be integrated. It has to have a convergence. And in the absence of that, you'll have this silo management thinking that says, let's fight this fire. Cybersecurity is on my radar. World Economic Forum says it's one of the top 10 risks. But what are your other 9 risks? What are your top 10 risks that could then be aligned with or put you in a position, or your organization's position, to be hacked? If those dots aren't connected, I fear that we're going to have more institutions in the Caribbean that can fall to hackers. And it's good if I could give take a point of privilege to say that's where entities like Hitachi comes in. And another point of privilege, if we say people risk is the greatest risk to any organization, who are the leaders within an institution that offers cybersecurity and other technology protocols to protect your organization? How confident are you with the decision makers at those technology companies? And again, a point of privilege, having know some of these guys, I think I am comfortable with decision makers that I know of in an institution like Hitachi Security Systems. And on that note, David, I pass it back to you.
Well, Ken, thank you so very much. That was very thought-provoking. The analogy of the airbag is one that is sticking in my brain right now. I've never thought of it that way, and you're quite right. The airbag is not going to prevent the accident, but it definitely will soften the blow should something happen. So that whole matter of connecting the dots on the risk side will definitely soften the blow should something take place, because we know at some point in time, something is definitely going to happen. So thank you very much for that, Ken. So that gives us the segue that we need now that the foundation has been laid. It gives us the segue to kind of narrow the focus a bit onto what's really going on in the Caribbean. So Angus, as the head of the TT CERT, could you share with us what you're seeing in the Caribbean? You just need to unmute your mic, Angus.
Ken, while Angus is trying to patch in, I think one of the things that both Daniel and Ed surely could attest to is all of the best cybersecurity standards by policy, governance, controls are in fact risk-based.
Yeah.
Right. So it naturally aligns to an enterprise risk-based approach. All right. So I think that's important for the audience to appreciate that even though you're driving towards certain security control standards, developing your policies, evaluating your security program based on your technology roadmap, all these governance and standards are risk-based and has an easy harmonization to an effective ERM framework.
Right. But the challenge, Anthony, from where I sit is that is the case. But do the institution or the deciders know of that connection? That's where the diversion goes. So it's incumbent upon us to sell that and drive that. And again, this conversation helps in that regard.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
So I'm speaking to you briefly.
Okay. Hello, you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sorry about that. Not sure what transpired, but it was working a minute ago. Technology, nonetheless. Yes, morning, everyone. Sorry about that. And I would like to say, Ken, I do agree with your presentation in the context of risk management. I'm fully aware that agree that risk management is very important in the scheme of things. I want to say thanks to Hitachi firstly for inviting me for this forum and all the participants. So my name is Mr. Angus Smith. I'm the manager of the Trinidad and Tobago Cybersecurity Incident Response Team. I have a short presentation on, in essence, cybersecurity with a focus on ransomware. Being operational, well, in essence, as a unit on the ground here, seeing incidents and dealing with incidents. I just want to share some of the things that are happening that we have been seeing over the past few, let's say, years, for instance, and identifying well where we've seen some of the issues. So, right. So this is just to say, I mean, in the context of the Caribbean, we have seen these are some of the opinions of, let's say, the World Bank in the context of the important or the significance of the potential of the Caribbean and its potential for being attacked or being a target now of the perpetrators of ransomware and malware and those particular vulnerabilities or threats in essence. And we see that the region has a significant economic value, which encourages, again, the threat actors to look at us as a target. And that is something that has been, and in our seeing what has been going on over, we have seen that this has been really growing from exponentially over the last few years. So this is just a small table of some of, no, I would like to say firstly that this table is some of the incidents that we or the unit has dealt with over the past few years, not necessarily the extent of ransomware attacks throughout the Caribbean. And I will clearly explain why that would be so in terms of the information I'm providing, and you will see that as we go along. So over the past 5 years, we can see we have had a number of different varieties of ransomware, which has attacked various institutions within, and this is Trinidad in essence. And I will get to the Caribbean in terms of the information that we do have, but this is generally what has happened to Trinidad over the past few years. Within the last, let's say since COVID, you will see based on the 2017, 2018, like we didn't get any information as to any, not necessarily that they didn't have any attacks, but in terms of us capturing information, this is what came to us, and this is some of the cases that we dealt with. So you would see there's a wide variety of variants in terms of the types of ransomware that did attack and the types of institutions that were attacked in Trinidad. Run the spectrum from government to financial, oil and gas, manufacturing, even retail sales. You would see different institutions and organizations have had cases and instances of being attacked by a ransomware. And in most cases, from what we know, payments weren't made, but in general, for the most part, most of the information was either corrupted, lost, and they didn't get it back, which is tends to what happens. Even if in cases, I don't think I could recall anybody actually paying and getting access back to the information, and I could stand corrected on that. But this is something that tends to happen now, and you can see as time goes by and as we go along, it seems to be increasing. Now, that could be twofold. It could be that we have some instances that happened in previous years that they weren't reported. But as of now, we're getting more reports and getting more instances of ransomware within Trinidad and Tobago. So from the Caribbean perspective, and this is the information based on the contacts that I do have that I got in the context of Caribbean instances. And you would see in Antigua, got information as to one medical institution having an attack. Barbados, we have financial institutions as well as hospitality industry. In Jamaica, I only know, no, that financial isn't the spectrum of the 6 attacks, but that is the information we could have got. At least one financial institution was attacked in Jamaica, but there were 6 incidents that we know of. Now, I'll explain that a little bit more as we go along. From one of my threat intelligence sources, what was said is that there were they dealt with 38 ransomware attacks over the last 6 months. Now, 16 of these occurred, inclusive of Ansa-Macal and Port of Spain City Corporation, occurred within Trinidad and Tobago. The rest were across the region. So we could see that over the last, since the start of COVID, we have seen a growth of ransomware attacks. At least the reports of ransomware and incidents have come up. So we're seeing that the attacks are now getting a lot more in essence. So this is just a little depiction of ransomware attacks over the last 6 months in essence. And you can see from September 2020 to now, which is 2021, you can see that there is a significant rise in the amount of organizations affected by ransomware. And you'll see currently within the last, let's say, since January, we have seen a rise in actually attacks, a marked increase in these types of attacks. So we realize that we are being recognized as potential victims or potential targets, and the ransomware threat actors are actually looking at us and trying to attack even on a larger scale. This would just be in terms of what we see when we deal with incidents. We would see that these are some of the known attack vectors that tends to be some of the weaknesses in some of the organizations that we have dealt with. And you would see some of where the ransomware attacks initiate themselves from would be from, in essence, phishing emails. You would see that based on the scams, and they do change passwords, they come through attachments. These are some of they would attack the systems based on that, and they would have vulnerabilities based on that. When we look at where the ransomware attack occur, it would be through these particular vectors. System vulnerabilities, we always tend to see either they have firewall issues, application issues, a number of vulnerability alerts or warnings have been issued for particular firewall applications, especially where we're looking at remote desktop protocol. You would see that there are a number of vulnerability, or we have sent out a number of alerts where it is that particular vendor products have issues, and they have issued warnings, and we have put out these to alert people so that they should be able to update the systems and get them functional. System configuration, patching and updating. These are some of in almost every case that we dealt with, you would see some level of patching of systems and misconfigurations happening where they have to actually either patch the systems, update the systems, and have that functional in order to you would see that as an issue. When you do your assessment and you do your investigations, you'd realize, okay, they have some systems that are misconfigured, or they have some updates or systems that require updating. It has been almost every case that happens. So those are some of the things that we need to pay attention to in the context of the region. This may be a little bit of a segue into some of the issues that we find. So some of the exploits, and I got this from one of my sources, and they have identified over the past, let's say 6 months to a year, these are some of the issues that have been, in essence, rearing its head in organizations throughout the region. Denial of service activities, information disclosure. You will see authentication bypass, where username and passwords are being circumvented, and also remote code execution, especially where web applications are concerned. Those are some of the things that, again, when we build application or we have systems, we need to pay attention to within the region, for the most part, especially in light of us doing or having this digital transformation trust, where we're now trying to provide most systems online, payment systems and application and services online. We need, when we build these applications, to actually pay attention to some of these vulnerabilities to ensure that we don't create gateways into our systems so that we would be subjected to various types of malware. This slide do a little bit away from the ransomware, but in the context of, let's say, your email and your email server, this recent vulnerability, in essence, via Microsoft. Now, we have done, and this is from us looking at the landscape, especially in Trinidad, and looking at the number of affected email servers, Exchange servers, which are vulnerable in the context in light of this new vulnerability. We have seen 97 affected IP addresses, wherein 74 different organizations affected in terms of their Microsoft Exchange server being actually vulnerable to this exploit. And it's something that we are working with the local entities to try and correct, in essence. So as we go along, and this is why, and this is important because ransomware especially comes through your mail server. It tends to, that is one of the vectors. And so this is why this is important to have your mail server looked at, fixed, patched, and take your mitigation measures and ensuring that the risks to your organization is minimized by you being proactive and being actually looking at this particular exploit and addressing the issue as soon as possible. So this is just really to enlighten people that, yeah, look, you're trying to protect yourself from ransomware, but this is one of the main vectors that it would attack you through. So you need to really be on, have this done and addressed. So now, earlier you would see in the context of the information I would have, as I said before, we have issues in terms of actually really truly identifying, well, okay, yesterday we may have had reports of ransomware from Trinidad and about the Caribbean, but there are some little teething issues within the Caribbean in order to why we do have, let's say, a comprehensive picture as to how much ransomware attacks actually on an active basis. We would hope that as time go by and as people get more understanding and the reasoning, they would actually now see the importance of either reporting a ransomware attack or addressing it, or letting somebody know at least that I have been attacked, so that at least you could help protect your fellow men, in essence, everybody else in the Caribbean. So as you see, risk assessments coming out of Ken's speech, risk assessment is really looking at the risks that would impact your organization. That is something very, very much that we need to take cognizance of. And these are things that we have seen over time that are weaknesses, in a sense, in most systems and in most organizations where it comes to cybersecurity. Operationally, people and process. Sometimes the problem is not really the technology, it's really the people that you have and their processes that you have, and that is where the weakness is. Some of the processes we use in new technology with old processes, and we have not updated the process to cater for what we're trying to do, especially in this new age and this new technology. Again, I spoke about configuration management, patching your systems, which is so important. At the end of the day, a lot of vulnerabilities affect the organization because we didn't patch the system, we left it. Sometimes we months behind. That would always leave you with a backdoor open. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just like your house. If you build a house, you don't put burglar proof in and you don't keep it closed, somebody will walk through. And it's the same thing. It's almost leaving a gate open to your system by not patching it and not updating it. The cost association, those are things that are very hard. People tend to ask that question, what is the cost of a ransomware attack to an organization within the Caribbean? And that's something that's very hard to quantify right now. We see that as a weakness. And I think not being able to quantify the cost to an organization does not really communicate the true impact of a ransomware attack. And it doesn't maybe spur the management and the leadership to actually put proactive activities in place. So those are things that we need to focus on. Information sharing, and that is actually one of the main reasons why it is very hard to have true statistics. Information sharing is important, and between trusted parties and between the right persons, you need to share information so that everybody will be able to know, okay, a ransomware attack occurred in a particular territory or country in the region, and that we could now understand what we need to share this information so that everybody will be aware. One of the attacks, the vectors, how to mitigate, and what we can do to help protect yourself. And again, information sharing will help in that. And it's just really, that is really based on trust, trusting the parties you share with, and you need to do that. Policy and legislation, like a lot of countries, they are in stages of policy development and legislation. And why I need that? Because at the end of the day, some countries will have CSIRTs, which will be responsible for investigating and looking at attacks. But they may not have the policy and legislation to support them from either coming to do the investigation or to, again, getting the information as to why attack happened or when the attack happened. That goes with mandatory, with what you'll see lower down, I have reporting. Reporting should be mandatory in some cases, especially with government institutions and very, let's say, critical infrastructure and critical information infrastructure entities. There should be some kind of mandatory reporting when an attack happens, again, so that we can have a better picture of how the Caribbean is susceptible to these attacks and what we could do. Standards, auditing and compliance. At the end of the day, organizations have a responsibility to function at a level to incorporate industry best practice and standards, which it should be, in order to protect yourself. And once you are functioning within the realm of a standard, it would again help to strengthen your institution. Again, we talk about risk. all that would be part of your risk framework and understanding that we need to have these things in place in order to actually minimize the risk. And again, put us in a place that we could function at a more robust level. Incident management plan, like every good organization, you should have one. It would allow having either a CSIRT capability or a CSIRT functionality within your organization. Whether you have one person in your organization that has the responsibility to look at the security posture of the organization and actually treat with it. Those are some of the things that we need to have in place. And a lot of organizations tend to not have it in place. Working backups, ransomware. Ransomware is a risk that even if you do get attacked from ransomware, if you don't have a working functional backup, it tends to put your organization at a place where you have to start from scratch. And a lot of let's say the incidents or the victims that we do encounter tend to not have a working or functional backup, or even if they do have a backup, it is not actually working, or they're not sure, they haven't tested it. Those are things that we need to put in place, and it's a risk that we tend to see all the time. And last but not least, employee education. At the end of the day, Kenya spoke about people. And at the end of the day, people is one of the as I say, the weakest link at the end of the day. Your organization is only as strong as the people that you have in the organization, their level of awareness and the level of education that they have. So that is where you need to know that your users should be knowledgeable of their functionality and what they should do. And those are some of the things we tend to see if we go from organization to organization, incident to incident. We'll see some form of these issues within the organization. Just a quick to see who you could get help from, or if you're looking for technical assistance, especially if you have a ransomware attack or have some cybersecurity issue. In every country within the region should have a national CSIRT, and if they do, should have some form of organization that is responsible for dealing with cybersecurity incidents. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service Cybercrime and Social Media Unit to provide assistance, and then we also have the TTC CIRT. I think in every country, though, you would have some form of security service provider, who you could contact to get some form of assistance. And I think they would be glad. Most of the vendors I know or providers I know would be glad to provide some form of assistance if you can't or you don't have a national CSIRT or some capable organization. For information, these are just two of the partners in terms of us partnering with awareness providers. And we have the Get Safe Online and TT, and then we have Stop Think Connect. Both organizations provide information as far as awareness, cybersecurity best practice, and things that you could do as an organization to help you create a higher level of cyber hygiene and put you in a position that at least to reduce your risk of having ransomware attacks. And finally, as I said, this is where most persons, especially Trinidad, could contact the TTC CIRT and would be able to get information, and some of the information that we put out on a almost daily basis as far as vulnerabilities, issues, that kind of information we would tend to put out, alerts, warnings, and technical information. So I hope my presentation was helpful in essence. And if anybody have any questions, I have no problem. As you said, we could put the questions in the chat and we will deal with them. Okay, back to you.
Angus, thank you. That was extremely enlightening, and it does shed a lot of light in terms of what's going on here in the Caribbean. Now, it's funny, the questions have started to roll in, and these questions are extremely good. So I know that we have two more presentations to go through, and I definitely want to get into the questions so that the panel can address them. Now, Angus, as you were going through your presentation, you kept talking about ransomware. So, Ed, what exactly is this, and why is it such a challenge for organizations today?
Certainly. So, I mean, this is a very, very serious conversation. So I'll start with a little joke. Where is the cyber criminal? He ran somewhere. Okay, but let's talk a little bit about ransomware, because I think there's a lot of misconception, right? I mean, every time I speak at one of these conferences, there's always a list of 20 to 100 things that you can do to harden yourself, risk management concepts, and so on. And I think everything is quite legitimate. I also hear a lot of times, people are the risk. It's true. If there were no people in the world, there would be no cybercrime or ransomware. So that would be an easy solution, I guess, and if you look at it from that perspective. But the big question is always, what people are we talking about, right? Are we talking about your people, your organization's people? Are we talking about the cyber criminals? If we eliminate these cyber criminals, there would be no problem. What about people from a different organization, maybe your vendors, maybe your clients? That could be a problem as well, right? So really, people are definitely kind of the weaker link, but it's all of us together. We're all in one big cooking pot, so to speak, and we need to address this situation on a more massive scale. And taking people aside, how are you going to quantify the risk associated with the latest, Microsoft vulnerabilities, SolarWinds, Fortinet firewall vulnerability, SonicWall, and the list can, keeps on growing and growing. And the cyber criminals, all they need to do, their ear is to the ground, waiting for the next kind of vulnerability to come out that they can monetize. The reality is, and I'm saying this because I'm the one responding to these cyber attacks on a daily basis. We handle anywhere from 8 to 20 cases per day, and we're just a small piece of the big story, right? My opinion is that we're literally in the middle of a cyber war, right? Putting all jokes aside, we are literally, by what we're doing or not doing or how we're responding to things, we are potentially funding an army of cyber criminals to continue and attack us, right? And with that said, these resources are helping cyber criminals to evolve how they're attacking us. And it's becoming a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, right? If we go back a couple of years ago, typical ransom amount would be about $10,000, $20,000. My God, if it was $50,000, it was like a significant ransom. Now, I would say a typical ransom amount is anywhere from $1 to $2 million. So if you end up getting attacked and the cyber criminal is asking for like $50,000, it's almost like a no-brainer. Let's just pay and move on. The other thing to remember is that ransomware isn't just about locking your data. In many cases, threat actors would come in. They would not even bother locking your data anymore. They would just leave a ransom note and say, you better pay us or we're going to publish your data. And in many cases today, we're having this, what we call double extortion mechanism. And it's actually moving into what I call a triple extortion mechanism. What does that mean? That means they will come in, they will lock your systems, they will steal your data. And if you don't respond quick enough, they will start attacking you with denial of service attacks. They will attack other mechanisms. They may install what's called a persistence mechanism in your environment. And as you're trying to recover, they will hit you again and again and again until you're basically forced to make a payment to make these guys or gals go away. So ransomware is evolving. Let me tell you a quick story. Hopefully it's going to fit within my time. Essentially, think of it this way: a fairly large company, let's call them Venus, okay? Roughly, big company, 10,000 employees, give or take, and then associated servers and systems and technical control and even risk management. And they were doing all the right things. They were spending roughly $10 million annual on cybersecurity alone, okay? They were doing all the right things and they were successfully attacked. How were they attacked? Very simple. A vendor of theirs got attacked. the mailbox of that vendor was compromised. It's a very simple attack. It's called in the industry a business email compromise. But let's go back to ransomware. That vendor essentially was emailing the accounting team at this company at Venus, and they basically said, we're changing our accounting. Make sure that when you pay us, you're paying to this account. And accounting said, okay, we'll do that. And they made the change, and $9 million US later that were transferred to that vendor, they realized that this was really cyber criminals that they were communicating with. But wait, there's more. Because that vendor also sent a few emails to some of the other people within Venus, and in those emails, they had malicious attachments. And because it came from this trusted vendor, the people at the Venus organization, they said, oh, I know this person, so I'm going to click on this and see what he's talking about that I need to action and so forth. And they got basically compromised, but they weren't encrypted right away. What happened was those executables opened a window, or really a shell it's called, into those multiple systems. The threat actors, while they're doing the wire fraud on the one side, use these workstations to compromise over 10,000 devices in the Venus organization. And they took over by essentially escalating their privileges. They became administrators, super users, essentially within the domain of Venus. And they encrypted, they stole information, and then they basically demanded an additional ransom. They only demanded about $3 million. So, $9 million for the wire fraud, $3 million over here, $12 million in total impact. The company wanted to not pay these guys because nobody wants to pay cyber criminals. Let's be honest. There's not a single company in this world that's going to say, I love making payments to cyber criminals after they hit me. So they wanted to recover from backups. Unfortunately, some of the backups were encrypted. Some of the backups they had on tape, so they were able to potentially start restoring. But guess what? Restoring from tape takes time. It takes a long time to restore. And when we're talking about 10,000 systems, it's going to take months. In some cases, it could take up to a year. So the company made the decision. They said, it's going to cost me $20 million to restore from tape and not pay these criminals, or I'm going to make a payment of $3 million and I'm going to expedite my ability to get back to business. Why did they make this decision? Right? It's easy to criticize, but ultimately 10,000 people jobs were on the line, revenues were on the line, and it's not just about money. It's also about, stakeholders, shareholders, and so on. But guess what? The threat actors said, if you don't pay me fast enough, I'm going to short your stock. And then I'm going to go public with the fact that we attacked you. And what's going to happen is your stock is going to tank, and we're going to make our $3 million either way. Okay? So the reason I tell this story is because ransomware isn't as simple as somebody came in, some kid, teenager in a basement came into my company, encrypted my data, and he wants some money. It's a very simple way to kind of look at what ransomware truly is. And the reality is these cyber criminals, they are massively organized. We're talking about cyber criminal organizations, not one person doing this. There is operators, there's affiliates, there are bosses. If we're talking millions of dollars or billions of dollars, you can imagine that there's some serious investment being made from the cyber criminal side to actually have these attacks happen against, legitimate businesses across the world. Now, the other thing is, you know, it's not about so much you as an organization, because the threat actors are going to be looking for those cracks in the door, right? And it doesn't mean that you can ignore all these other recommendations that the other speakers provided. All that means is cybersecurity, first of all, we need to realize there isn't a solution to it. It's not like I can spend $1 million and get a solution and I'm good forever. There's no such thing, okay? It's a journey, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And it's all about the journey. There is no real destination, okay? So you need to really consider your approach to cybersecurity or lack thereof. And you need to enrich those decisions with actual threat intelligence that's coming from the field, right? So, because as I said, 2 years ago, what I would have been talking about would have been significantly different than what I'm talking about right now. Okay? So, in summary, ransomware is complex, cybersecurity is complex. We're going to have a little bit of panel discussion as well about those type of activities. But my recommendation is, like in real life, right? If something, God forbid, happens from a medical situation and you need to go to a hospital, I hope you know where's the hospital, right? I hope that you have the doctors familiar with your medical situation and so on. This is very similar to cybersecurity. You can do all the right things, you can still get attacked, but if you do, make sure you know who to call, because unfortunately in this industry, there's many companies that are being propped up to make payments to cyber criminals. And those companies themselves are not what I would consider necessarily legitimate. So you got to be very careful. Some companies also promise things that don't exist. They promise decryption keys for free, or that they have some amazing technology to solve the ransomware encryption problem. It doesn't exist. In some cases, it's true there's faults in the encryption mechanism, and then somebody comes up with a tool and releases it to public domain. But if you understand cryptography and how encryption actually works, you would know that typically there's what's called a private key and a public key. The public key can be public, the private key only the bad guys have, and it's typically unique per victim. So don't fall into kind of like hoping that somebody's going to sell you some miracle solution. Cybersecurity is hard. It's not an easy field to be in. It's not an easy to basically find solutions and harden your posture. But ultimately, it's very worthwhile, because we need to make these cyber criminals work harder before they can successfully attack us. And we need to work together ultimately. I think this is really a key message. We cannot be just kind of, I'm okay, I'm investing, I don't care about my vendors, I don't care about my clients, I don't care about the person walking in to service my printers, because ultimately they're all risk and they all need to be managed. Thank you. David, over to you.
Ed, that was fantastic. And I like the way you ended it, to bring it back home to the fact that there's really no silver bullet or no panacea to the whole thing. Now, you know, when you said the fact that there are 8 to 20 cases per day, that's very frightening. And it makes me wonder, if we have so many cases taking place per day, how do we effectively deal with that? So this takes us to the last presentation that Daniel Goodrow is going to present to us, which is a real-life impact, a case study, so to speak, of ransomware. Now, before Daniel starts, I just want to acknowledge that we quickly approach in stoppage time. And I know we had catered for 1 hour. We've got just about 2 minutes left in terms of the time that was allotted for this webinar. For those of you who can continue, by all means, please stay on, because we definitely want to get into the questions, okay? So I just wanted to, I do apologize that we went over, but it's been so exciting. As you can understand with things like these, there's a lot of content that comes out. So Danielle, could you take us through the last one, please? Okay, these things do happen from time to time, guys. You can always depend on technology to keep it exciting for you.
Yeah. Hey, while we're waiting, can I ask Angus a question if you're there, eh? So
yes, I am. Go ahead.
So your very last slide made me all warm and fuzzy, where you had risk assessment as the number one, and then next to that you had people and process risks. And what I have found in the Caribbean is that again, speaking to my advocacy, that technology and risk management ought to be denominators across an organization. And oftentimes what's missing is that risk assessment or that risk management framework or the risk management protocols that will help drive, say, cybersecurity risk management. And so cybersecurity, as all of the speakers have including Ed, when you mention take SolarWinds and you're not looking too much at your vendor or the guy coming in to service your printers. So one of the questions I would ask as a risk assessor is, do you scrub your printers and your photocopiers before you send it back to the folks you're leasing it from? And oftentimes, they take all of that for granted, and no, that does not happen. And I'm also an advocate for saying, let me asking major vendors or suppliers, can I see a copy of your IT risk assessment or your internal or your risk assessment or your business continuity plan? There's nothing prohibitive about that. So that's how you drive in risk management, not within your own space, but within the spaces that could impact upon you. And not enough of those conversations are being had. There's this level of take for granted that my supplier has everything, and if SolarWinds have taught us anything, and you referred to that in your presentation as well, that reliance on third-party suppliers, how good are they? Because they'll sell you anything or tell you anything to get into your space.
Definitely. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
All right, super. Sorry about that. I guess the web interface didn't like the fact that I didn't speak for so long. So I'd like to thank the previous presenter, because you've set up the discussion for what I'd like to touch on. I think that Anthony had a question for Ken earlier on, and I think that one of the key issue is that security, risk management are business issues, not technical issues. And most of the time, a lot of times, because it affects the technology, because it affects the data, business owners or people that are not that comfortable with technology would actually stand off and say, well, you're my IT manager, it's your responsibility, or you're my CIO, you need to take charge of this. The reality is that it has nothing to do with technology. Technology is only a mean in order to operate the business, and we need to keep that in mind. So I think that Ed did something that introduced the notion of ransomware pretty well. And the reality is that we need to realize that no one is too small for a ransomware attack. As long as there's an opportunity and people feel that you're ready to pay, or that you have enough money to pay, even government, by the way, government is not excluded from that scenario. Government is still a target for a lot of these cyber criminals. And once they have the motive, the opportunity, and the means, they will execute. And the other reality is that if you look at the interconnection that we have nowadays, I think that with the pandemic, the fact that people were connected to the internet made it possible to continue to operate. The downside of this is obviously that we're all connected to the internet. We're all operating using the internet. So that's something that we need to keep in mind, that the opportunity is there. The other thing that also enabled cybercriminal and state-sponsored criminals to execute is the fact that they can be paid without being traceable. So we need to be careful. That's another opportunity or another mean that they could use in order to do it safely for themselves and not be prosecuted. The other thing is that now with the darknet, now with the means that they have in order to anonymously communicate with their victims, hey, they have it's very hard to trace them back. It's hard for law enforcement officers to actually get them to be exposed in the way that they operate. One thing that we didn't mention so far, and that I'd like to point on, is the fact that ransomware is normally the last mile. It's something that has been prepared previously. Hacking an email account is an example. Getting into a network and trying to understand what is there that could be attacked is another example. So eventually you would see some, most of the time when we do the investigation or the forensic on ransomware attacks, we would see that other steps were taken sometimes months before the actual attack was executed. So I think we need to keep that in mind. The last point I'd like to mention here is that, and I think we had a question in the chat about this, is that it's a challenge for governments. It's a challenge for law enforcement's groups to actually prosecute these criminals. There are no international laws that would enable you to reach out to Russia or to reach out to an external party to actually prosecute those criminals. So we're in the early stages of understanding this fact, and probably I would assume that eventually laws will come into play. But right now you do have cyber criminals that are actually ignored by their local governments, even though they're aware that they execute criminal activities in other countries. And at the end of the day, their objective is to destabilize and create chaos a little bit on either other governments or private sectors for their own benefit. So what are the emerging threats for ransomware in 2021? The reality is that more and more sophisticated tactics will be used. Ed did mention a few that are very interesting. I've read also that some of them are offering now a hotline where you can call and have one of the files decrypted to prove that they can actually decrypt your information. So we need to be mindful that these will definitely be more prevalent. The increasing value of ransomware, again, or ransom demand, sorry. Again, Ed here did mention that it scaled up quite a bit in the last few months. And I think that depending on your capacity to pay, they will probably align their target, making sure that they maximize their time and efforts, because obviously they need to invest and they need to find collaborators to make it happen. We did talk about third parties. Guys, keep in mind that managed service providers that are actually looking after your IT assets are a sweet spot. They're a target for sure, because if they're not properly protecting or properly managing your environment, that's going to be a challenge for sure. They're going to get paid somehow, and the more and more they're going to find ways to force payment, whether it's using the tactics that Ed mentioned, having multiple prong on your data, on the pressure points to your business. But at the end of the day, they're looking after money. They want to have money in order to continue their operation. And last but not least, I think that part of what they will be aiming for, specifically for state-sponsored attacks, we could see a lot targeting the industrial control systems, whether it's for public services or for the private sector. So oil and gas, water systems, you name it. Those could be even power systems could be impacted by those. So we did talk about some of the ways to prevent ransomware. Obviously, people being one of the first layer of defense that we would have for anything that would come in through email. That's for sure. That this is definitely something that we need to care for and be cognizant of. Probably investing in that area is going to pay off not only for ransomware but for the actual health of the operation. Vulnerability management is key. You need to be patching your systems nowadays. Specifically, there are, I don't know if you follow what's going on with Chrome and Microsoft Edge. There is, I think, 30 something vulnerabilities published or discovered almost every week or every second week. So this is something that you need to be mindful of. And these are the browsers that people are using on a daily basis in order to access SaaS or other applications in the cloud. The one thing that, the one analogy I would like to make is that cybersecurity or running a business is a bit like driving a car. You don't need to be a mechanic in order to drive a car. You don't need to understand what's going on under the hood. You don't need to understand how the power is given to the powertrain and so on and so forth. It doesn't matter. You know how to drive. You know how to do it safely. You know how to avoid risk on the road and whatnot. Well, driving your business is the same. If you don't know how to drive your business from a security standpoint, from a risk management standpoint, then there's a chance that you may forget that one of your IT assets is actually managed by a third party, and you completely forget about doing an audit and reviewing how they proceed and what's their way of operating. And at the end of the day, that they're your weakest link, and this is where the actual attack could come in. You also need to consider reviewing your security architecture. It's one thing to do all the right things, but if you have a weak security architecture, the day that you're going to get compromised, the day that one of your vendors is going to get compromised, you may end up with a spread that you didn't anticipate within your network. And this is something that you need to review, understand how to properly deploy the different controls, and ensure that your security posture is monitored on a regular basis, so that you enable you get your best possible protection. Even though, as I would agree with Ed, there's zero risk doesn't exist. It's impossible. So we just need to make sure that at least the best practices are in place, so that you can react or contain quickly if ever you're hit. One of the key recommendations from the Canadian government to all of the local businesses here is to make sure that whatever you do not execute something coming from the outside, even coming from the inside. The example that Ed gave, where someone who was trusted shared an email, was a third party, was known from the internal employees, actually led to the actual compromise of the entire environment within a few days. So we need to be careful with that. Something else: do not allow people that that should not have admin privileges to have those privileges part of their regular user accounts. This is something that maybe is a bit technical for people that are more business, but at the end of the day, the notion is definitely to minimize the level of privileges that you're giving to your employees in order for them to execute their work. If they don't need it on a minute-to-minute basis, then just make sure that you remove those. We talked about backups. Backups are key in order to restore your business, but they're key in as long as they're not sitting on your network and accessible. That's the issue. The issue, if you get your systems encrypted and your backups are encrypted as well, you're doomed. There's nothing you can do about this. So in order to make sure that your environment is safe, well, you need to recover from those backups. and make sure that you question the flow and you question the way that they're stored and where they're stored. So in essence, I think that having a zero risk environment is almost impossible and would be unpractical. But the reality is that there are a few things that you could do in order to be ready if ever you're ever hit by one of these attackers. So back to you, David.
Thank you so much, Danielle. This really gives a practical side to the topic that we've been discussing today. So thank you very much for doing this for us. Now, before I go into the Q&A, let me just let everyone know, all the attendees know, that the recording of today's session will be made available to you, so you'll have it to go over at your own leisure. So as I mentioned before, while all the presentations were going on, the questions kept coming in. So let me quickly start them off. And Ken, the first one actually comes to you. It comes from one of the financial institutions that's attending. And the question has to do with operational risk. Given the presentation that you made on enterprise risk, the question is, should we then look to redefine operational risk as the risk of loss resulting from inadequate employee education, failed internal controls and systems, or from external events? So that's the question that's being posed. What say you? You're on mute, Ken. Ken, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thanks for the question. So no, I don't think redefining operational risk management needs to happen, because about two things with that. And again, I speak from a practitioner's perspective. I don't necessarily like the word just loss, because risk management is both value creation, value protection, definition. But if we stick with that, it's from failed processes and people. And people part of it, the people part of the definition could include both enhanced risk intelligence, risk education, and also culture. So the actual definition is from failed processes, people, external events, blah, blah, blah. So the people side, especially if we are engaged, when we look at people, the people and culture risk, we look at things like adequacy risk, i.e. right fit, right job, education. So when we interrogate processes and people, I have been known to ask for, let me see the resume. So let's see the last performance appraisal. Yeah. But again, no, I don't think a new definition needs to be looked at.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. So Daniel and Ed, this one is going to come to you now. This one is a little technical in nature. Most companies build their policies around the industry frameworks that we're accustomed to, NIST, ISO, and COBIT. Do you think that companies are not highlighting cybersecurity more in their business and organizational policies, which in turn is resulting to so many high cyber attacks throughout the Caribbean region? What do you say to that?
So let me start by quickly saying that, first of all, my background started as a technical practitioner. And whenever I would hear a word called policy or a process, my eyes would go so far back. But in all seriousness, as you kind of evolve, you realize that policies and processes are superbly important. You cannot have a well-defined, effective process in place without a governing policy and so on. With that said though, okay, the biggest challenge in the world around cybersecurity is too many people downloading Google policies and implementing, because, you know, it's so easy to copy and paste. You know, thought into these policies and processes, regardless, forget the NIST, forget all these other frameworks, great, awesome, great for direction, they're non-prescriptive. If you're gonna write a policy, make sure that that policy is like a custom tailored suit It's fitting for you, for your situation. And oh, by the way, it may not fit tomorrow, right? Because I ate a little more hamburgers today. Now I need a new suit. Same thing with the policy, okay? It needs to evolve. Cybersecurity needs to continuously evolve, just like your technology, just like your revenue plans, just like your business, just like your life, right? We need to stop thinking about static approaches to cybersecurity and start thinking about continuous evolution of the process. And by the way, many of the assessment and audits today, if you look at CMMI scoring, number 5, the best, that is a process and a policy that continuously feeds and evolves, right? And this is what we need to really be thinking about, regardless of the frameworks. And again, I'm not shooting down frameworks. Don't get me wrong. I'm actually teaching about them in university. But I want to make sure that you don't just blindly follow what somebody else put down, and that it's truly reflective of your business environment and that it's applicable. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah. And David, if I could add, I just want to, it's a question that I ask, C-suite members, all right? And I know Angus mentioned the point about quantifying impacts, but just qualify it. So for example, the question I would ask is, what is your major revenue stream? And how is that revenue stream enabled through systems? And if that particular system was attacked by many of the vectors that Angus presented, 1, what will be that impact to your company from a dollar and reputational standpoint? 2, how long will it take you to recover? All right. And 3, not only the issue about the revenue that you're losing, but what other potential new business you're going to lose because now your credibility is impacted. So just answer those 3 questions, all right? And you will see that security and cybersecurity is, in fact, a business discipline, all right? It is.
It is.
Yeah.
Indeed. And I think what I'd like to add to Ed's point and Anthony's point is the fact that policies are there in order to establish a contract of conduct between what we've deployed as an architecture in order to protect the environment, what are the constraints, what are the impact on business systems and whatnot, and the actual behavior that we're expecting our employees to follow. And if it's not aligned, as Ed said, if I download something from Google and it's not aligned to my business at all, even though it states all of the best practices and whatnot, I'm going to get killed in a few weeks because it's not aligned to the way that I operate, the way that I'm expecting the employees to behave, and so on and so forth. So it's really key that, again, depending on the threat landscape, depending on the technologies I'm using, depending on the security architecture I'm deploying, my policies needs to be evolving towards that.
David, can I just add one quick thing to the conversation? And so I would advise not just use the word deploy. In my space, I say develop and deploy because there's no one cap fits all. It's the whole thing about downloading and we have that. And more specific to the question, there's a reliance on, and I think it was Angus or Ed mentioned this, or maybe even you, sir, that let's leave it to the IT risk professionals in the organization. But how well prepared or risk educated are they in the cybersecurity space, guys? So it comes back to that people risk conversation. So it's not deploy, it's develop and deploy.
So it's funny that you should say that, Ken, because both Anthony, Ed, and Daniel have really set up the question that follows next, which is for you. Given your experience in risk management, how important do you think leadership and risk intelligence amongst Caribbean companies needs to be, specifically at the board and the C-suite? Because for so often it seems to be more of a bottom-up approach where IT takes the brunt of everything as opposed to the message coming from the top down. So what should the board and the C-suite be considering? What should they be thinking about right now?
I think Anthony probably knows where I'm going to go with this. So based on my experience, speaking across the Caribbean here, if the construct of the board and even senior management was never trained in the things we are talking about, and I'm not saying go get a CISA degree, but by way of information, knowledge sharing, but if they aren't knowledgeable in this space, they aren't going to be as receptive to the things we are suggesting. Because if they can't think it, they're not going to want to act on it. And secondly, if I have not been paid, so if the dog has not bit me on my butt, I care nothing about dogs in my yard. And that's reality there. No, there are exceptions to that. And I'm sure deep dive Angus and his team will do. Some of this is reflected or ought to be reflected. So by way of governance and C-suite, one is back to the people risk element, education, training, knowledge sharing. So when my team goes into an organization, I mandate that we have mini workshops. So we all singing from the same hymn book. They know what the terminologies are. It helps to manage expectations. But a critical missing element to all that we're talking about, be it cybersecurity risk management, enterprise risk management, is information, knowledge sharing, and even education.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Ken. So there's a comment that has come in from one of our attendees as it relates to the European Union. And the comment is, if you're under GDPR or similar legislation, you have no choice. You have to report the loss of data. And if you're negligent, you're going to be fined. And the fine is so huge, it could potentially cripple you. So now Angus and Anthony, as some of the Caribbean representation on the panel, what's the legislation like in the CARICOM member states that would help to protect financial institutions against cyber attacks? And then beyond that, is there any legislation within the Caribbean that companies ought to be looking at, not just GDPR, which is more for a European feature, but is there anything else that entities need to seriously consider here in the Caribbean?
All right, I could start at least answer that question. In the context of Trinidad and Tobago, no, we have various types of legislation that would be, in essence, relevant. Trinidad has the Data Protection Act, but the challenge with that act is that it has not been fully declared, proclaimed in essence. And that therein lies the challenge. Now it's up for review, and we are in the context of doing that. So we are still challenged by providing what's called appropriate legislation to facilitate that type of protection. Now we have Electronic Transactions Act. We have different acts that may have some relevance and that may provide a degree of protection, but they are still not at the place. And even having a cybercrime act bill, in a sense, proclaimed, puts us in a space where we still have to put proper legislation in place to actually protect our entities properly. Now, a number of the Caribbean countries may have some of these legislations in various stages of development, or like Jamaica, who would have a cybercrime act proclaimed, and I think they have a data protection. And so that lots of the territories you would look at are actually in the process of putting these pieces of legislation in place. So there's still a lot of work to be done where it comes to data protection, and this, especially aligning with things like the GDPR to ensure that we have the same level of protection for organizations. So that is the challenge for, in essence, the Caribbean as a whole. So we are still a bit behind.
Can I, again, let me just jump in real quickly. So Angus is too kind. So I will say to you, answer and then qualify. So the answer to the question is no. Right? And then you can say, well, we have certain things that are not fully proclaimed. Because oftentimes in the space I am working in, you don't get a second chance to answer these types of questions. Somebody's life could be dependent on it, or a business can fail. So no, there's a lot of work, and I'm a Trinbagonian. So it pains me to see, but doing a comparative analysis, where some of the other Caribbean islands are versus where Trinidad and Tobago is with respect to legislation around any risk management discipline, respectfully. Yeah?
All right. So I agree with Ken, and I'll give the short answer as no, which I should have said first. So the short answer is really no.
I'm not influence, Anthony. I'm not
no. The truth is really no. Where it should be and what we really require and what we need, no. I mean, if we put being very brutally honest in essence, no. So we need to really put stuff in place.
But if I can add though, and the fact of the matter that the entire region is seeing that digital transformation as that road to recovery, all right, in terms of social and economy, the legislation has to follow. I mean, the fact that you're moving towards e-identity and e-signature, there is no second guessing across that. It has to happen. So, and that's the point I was making earlier on in my introduction, is that I see some opportunities to aggressively move the Caribbean as to where it needs to be. All right. So, I mean, I hope we have specific leaders in this discussion, but I think it has to be accelerated. That's the point I was thinking about, that bipartisan collaborative approach, because you need to legislate these things before you build the infrastructure, because sometimes the legislation drives what you implement. Okay, so this becomes critical.
Yeah, and I wanted to, before you continue, Ken, I just want to quickly say yes, and Anthony, yeah, that's right. In the context of things like e-identity and privacy and security, we really need as a whole in the Caribbean to actually put these things in place in order to move that digital transformation, what's called a drive in essence, forward, so that we can protect ourselves and protect the citizens and the information that we would have to share in essence and distribute among all the entities and the countries.
Agree on this.
Agreed. Now, I know that we are really over stoppage time, so I want to be mindful, and I want to thank the 102 attendees who have actually stayed on. Thank you so much. This is really good. Now, we're coming down to the end. We're on the last stretch. We just have about 2 more questions that we're going to go through, and then we're going to tie everything up. So, Anthony, the point you made about digital transformation has actually set up the next question for both Ed and Danielle. So it's a twofer for you guys. How has the impact of the cloud changed the cybersecurity landscape for the Caribbean? And then the follow-on to that is, how can companies within the Caribbean effectively establish trust in relation to cybersecurity with their end users, their clients, and most importantly, the supply chain?
Yeah, I can definitely start it off. So think about it this way, right? The cloud is probably one of the main drivers that are accelerating cyber attacks. Now you're going to say why? Because Amazon is so great at protecting, having huge cybersecurity teams and protecting their infrastructure, or Google Cloud, or Azure, or the various other cloud providers. Well, the reality is that the way companies are migrating to the cloud has accelerated, but also slowed down significantly. What that means is you're going to move your workload to the cloud, but you're going to keep the old legacy systems there, and you're going to connect the two environments together. And guess what? We only meant to keep it around for 2 weeks, but now it's been 2 years, and the environments are still connected, just in case, right? I mean, we've all seen the industry when the IPS came around, which is intrusion prevention systems. And everybody said, I got to get me one of those, because you know what? That's going to block attacks against my organization. And everybody started buying IPS, but nobody was actually implementing them in line. In other words, to actually react. They were just sitting there like an intrusion detection system as opposed to an IPS, right? But everybody felt good. They were willing to go home and sleep really well because I have an IPS. It's the same thing with cloud, and it's the biggest problem that I'm seeing. We are increasing our attack surface all the time by buying all these other things, right? And these are good things, by the way, if they're done correctly, if they're implemented correctly. But it's not correctly implemented if it works, but all the bad stuff, all the old stuff, they're still running as well, right? So there needs to be a very clear and concise, I don't know, you want to call it project management, you want to call it technical support, the right implementation strategy, and so on. It needs to be followed because otherwise risk is increasing. And if risk increasing, you're not managing it properly. And if you're not managing it properly, the bad guys will do it for you. Right? And that's the challenge that I'm seeing.
Okay, Danielle, you just need to unmute yourself.
I be mute, yeah. All right.
Okay, it looks as if the challenge you had before has happened again.
I think Daniel has been cyber attacked.
Somebody played around with his mute button, and it wasn't me.
Okay, let's just give him 2 seconds to quickly come back in because I think he wanted to make a valid point. And while we're waiting for Daniel to come back in, Angus, you have the actual second to last question because the question for you is, just so you can start thinking about it, given that you're the head of TT CERT, are there other certs in the Caribbean, and are you harmonizing your efforts between yourself and them? So you can think about that while Daniel answers, and then we'll go to you. Okay?
Am I back now?
Yes, sir.
All right, super. What I was about to say, Ed, to complement what you were saying, is that it all depends on what you consume in the cloud. If you're consuming SaaS, for example, so Microsoft 365, you're using another Salesforce, and you're using the best practices in order to protect your identities and making sure that you have two-factor authentication enabled and whatnot, at least you're leveraging those environments to make sure that you're using them in a safe mode and in a protected fashion. One of the core issue, and I think I would agree 100% with what you're saying, is that there is a lift and shift strategy from internal infrastructure to the cloud because of cost, because of the potential upgrades that are easier to do and whatnot, but there's no understanding of the security architecture that you need to deploy in the cloud, which is different than what you would find locally. So I think that and that coexistence that could last from 2 weeks to 2 years, I agree with you, I think is also presenting an additional threat landscape or an additional exposure or surface of attack that would bring some of the businesses in a no man's land where they don't understand what's going on. Is it on-prem? Is it in the cloud? We get the data stolen and we don't understand the ramification and the root cause. So the advice here is that cloud is not for everybody. You need to understand how to move to the cloud. You need to ensure that if you're about to consume infrastructure as a service in the cloud, is it really what you need? Or if you need a platform in the cloud that could actually be already well protected for you, whether it's a SaaS or another offering that you can consume right away. So really be careful with the cloud, but we also need to accept that it's a movement that will not stop. You're going to get pressure from your competitors, from the business to reduce costs or optimize costs, and cloud is definitely something to consider in that way.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Danielle. So Angus, back to the question that was posed to you. Given the fact that you have TT CERT and there may be other certs in the Caribbean, what's the harmonization like between all of you today? And how will that help the Caribbean organizations who are present and even those who aren't on the call?
All right. So there are certs additionally in the Caribbean. We have Jamaica, Guyana, currently active certs in the region, and we have some in development, but Antigua also, and we have like Barbados, Bahamas actually in development. We collaborate with them, one via, in essence, two platforms. We have one that is a shared platform with the region, which is the OAS's CSIT America's platform, and we have now a Commonwealth platform to also provide sharing for CSITs. The CSITs and that sharing would now provide us with the avenue to, in terms of resources, training, expertise, that type of information sharing between us, which is which happens between CSIRTs. So we tend to share information along directly between the CSIRTs. So that would provide the region with at least that type of synchronous information sharing and actually response to an incident. And it will provide that. So once these CSIRTs develop, and they actually develop as they go along and mature, we'll be able to provide a more robust response to incidents across the region, and that would help by us doing that. We also have the CARICOM Impacts organization that actually provides a platform, and they are supposed to launch a platform soon for RSS platform to share information also and to provide technical assistance for the region. So there are some mechanisms to share information among the CIRTs so that the region could have a more synchronous response in a sense. So that's where we're at right now in the terms of us going forward as territories having CSIRTs and going, providing incident response across the board.
Fantastic.
David, can I just follow up quickly a question to Angus? So,
please.
That's among similar entities, yeah, like organizations. But specific to you and Trinidad and Tobago, do you share data with institutions like warning signals?
Yes. So right now the TTC has, in essence, a mailing list, which is maybe close to 150 members. Now, the members would be either the officers or the person responsible for cybersecurity in the organization. And as fast as we interact or we work with them, we tend to put them on the mailing list and we provide access to our alerts, warnings, vulnerability information, and technical assistance in a sense. No, we are a government city first instance, so we're really focused towards the government. So that's in Trinidad and Tobago. Right. But we wouldn't turn down or not refuse to help a private sector organization where we see in terms of the type of incident that happens, and if we could help, we would provide assistance and we share that type of information as two threats.
Okay, but nothing real time, because you said so you send information out, so that's the push. But
I got to ask about monitoring and concept of real time monitoring. In terms of organizations, no, we don't provide that capability right now.
Is that being contemplated?
Yes, it'll be contemplated at some point in time, but that goes with us developing more on a national scale. Now, there are little mechanisms that we put in place to do that, but more so on a critical information infrastructure platform where we would identify these critical entities and maybe provide or develop some form of monitoring for those entities, because we can provide that type of monitoring for everybody. Now, there are different platforms that do live monitoring, as you know, but this is what we intend to do going forward.
Yeah, I think that ought to be sooner rather than later, in my respectful view. But we can have
the only comment I'll add to that,
I agree.
I love to put Angus as a competitor from the time he implemented
Oh my goodness, that's funny. So I'm seeing someone is saying, Anthony, that this conference is extremely informative. You need to have a part 2. So rest assured, there will be follow-on because this is a series. So to everyone who's on, there will be a continuation of this Caribbean cybersecurity series. So stay tuned. You'll hear more about that as we go along. The other thing I'd like to point out, if for those of you in the attendee list, if you look at your control panel, there's a little offer. There's a red dot on the horn. If you click on it, you'll see an offer. Go ahead, fill it out, the information, and we'll definitely get back to you. So, gentlemen, we spent roughly 1 hour and 43 minutes having a very spirited conversation. The presentations were fantastic. I thank you very much. I'd like each of you to offer for our audience your closing thoughts. Where do the organizations in the Caribbean go from here? After having heard everything that all of you have presented, where do they go from here? What's their next step in dealing with that threat of ransomware and, of course, the related cybersecurity threats? And we'll go in order. Anthony, we'll start with you and work our way down to Danielle.
Okay. So that's a very loaded question, because each the private sector and the public sector have defined objectives. For me, I simplify it around the people, the processes, and the technology. And quite honestly, the technology is the least of the issue. In all my years of getting input, is basically going back to Ed's point about understanding the right policies and processes and procedures applicable to your organization and what your business objectives are. If for a country, what's your socio-economic objectives that you want to achieve? Then the issue about the people, all right? Understanding what is the type of stakeholders, you need to get involved. How do you handle the governance within that context? And governance tend to speak a lot about, the board and the government and public accounts committee. But I also believe governance has to trickle down to the people at the line management level and actually users of the platform. The other dynamic is, and I keep saying this, for anything to work effectively, there must be a strong change management component. All right, Ed mentioned it as project management. And again, this is, so for anybody to move towards new technology or new platforms, they need to feel a sense of confidence. They need to believe that their information is ideally protected. A simple case in point. If you look at the countries within the Caribbean, it's relatively closed economies. We want to move towards digital transformation and digitization. And the ideal candidate for that will be government services and payment systems. All right. That is where I think will be the huge opportunities in to really roll out technology and digitization. But for you to move towards that, the consumers need to feel confident that the environment is protected. And that point that Angus raised and I think one equals about effective legislation, having a clear education and our security awareness program for the citizenry. All those things are key component, which comes back to one primary thing: people-centered leadership, risk intelligence.
Yeah.
Agreed. Ken, you want to pick up from there?
Yeah, I mean, to Anthony's point, I could easily just say ditto and then pass it back. I'll add a couple things. Digital transformation, like risk management, like cybersecurity, in my, it's not even a humble opinion, are now buzzwords in many of the Caribbean institutions. They are. And so if we're speaking to digital transformation, and I think Angus, with much love and respect, you use the words organization needs to pay attention to so and so. No, it's way past the pay attention. They need to do a deep dive. Because if you're talking about digital transformation, one of the fundamental, the resulting in is fundamental changes to how businesses operate and how they deliver value to customers. That's the end result of business transformation. And to Anthony's points, technology is on the back end. It's about governance, people, and the legislative part. I dare say, folks, on this, that's the only way the decision makers will be incentivized to push this, unfortunately. That is one of the key incentives for them to ensure that they have cybersecurity protocols and cybersecurity risk management. That's the unfortunate side. Lessons learned will apply in some cases, but if they aren't driven to make the change, many of them will be reluctant to, or take their time in getting to a stage that they ought to be at. And I speak to that because I think I know well enough some of the decision makers there. It's an unfortunate thing, but by way of training and education and that push to increase the risk intelligence of some of these decision makers will go a long, long way. But we have a challenge here, guys. We do. Cybersecurity is again now the burning bush. And so everybody's now rushing to out the fire there, forgetting everything else that can go wrong. And so we need to help. We need to be not just firefighters, but fire educators as well.
That's a very good point, Ken. Very, very good point. And, the need for education, I'm seeing a comment here saying customer education is a major, major requirement. And it's actually something that needs to be looked at, not only at the organizational level, but also at the governmental level as well. Because there's a level of technological ignorance that permeates throughout, which we have to deal with. So that sets you up, Ed. Where do we go from here? Now, I know both Anthony and Ken would have taken more of a risk tack. Both yourself, Angus, and Daniel have taken more of a technical tack. Where do we go from here?
So here's the thing. Everybody has their kind of opinions, and none of them is wrong, right? There's no such thing. We need to kind of, and I can probably talk about this for the next couple of hours, easy, right? But let me try and kind of be as succinct as possible. When the marketing department can go into the cloud and bring out a whole infrastructure with a credit card, right? That's a problem, right? It's a great capability because they don't need IT and they don't need, you know, anybody else, and they can just bring it up in 2 seconds. But you know what? Your information is going to be in that environment. So I think that one of the biggest issues that we need to focus on is building what I call the security mindset. That means everybody needs to understand the risks associated to their particular role and their decisions. Because like I said, we're all connected. So there isn't a simple answer here. There's probably a 200-page answer. Obviously, we need to have some sort of a plan though, right? Each organization needs to have a plan. Each government needs to have a plan, and it kind of needs to percolate down like coffee makers, right? That type of thing where it becomes part of our nature, right? I typically use this example. None of us is going to jump into a busy street with cars, right? Because we want to cross it. We're probably going to say, let's stop and take a look left, right, maybe a couple of times again to make sure. And only then we're going to cross very quickly, right? Because we understand the risk and we don't want to get hit by a car. Okay. The challenge with cybersecurity is we don't really understand the cars. We don't really understand that we're on a road. We know that there's a road somewhere, but we're not even sure whether we want to cross it, right? So let's have a plan and let's make sure that cybersecurity is integrated into our very nature, because the reality is your credit cards are at risk. Your bank accounts are at risk. Your kid's Roblox account could potentially be at risk. And by the way, if your kid is playing on a computer with a webcam behind you and you're doing serious work, you know what? That webcam could potentially be capturing stuff on your laptop. But you haven't thought about it because they're just playing a Roblox game, right? So definitely be considerate of this. But the other thing I would say is there needs to be in the world, right? There needs to be a better mechanism for knowledge sharing, right? So I can speak to you for a couple of hours, and in my opinion, you'll come out of that conversation going, wow, I didn't realize that's what's happening out there. Okay, this really shouldn't be the case. This shouldn't be news, right? We shouldn't be fed simply by media. We need to be fed by real threat intelligence, experience, without all the mumbo jumbo and special keywords and you know, all these sexy terms and acronyms that we all love to use, right? So let's try and bring it down to a level that individuals first and then organizations hopefully start to really synthesize and understand what the risk is. The last thing I would say is this: if any one of us consider ourselves a cyber expert, get out of this field, please. Get out of this field. And you know, it's a joke, but you know, you look on LinkedIn, cyber expert, world-renowned cyber expert. Guys, we're all learning on a regular basis because this is evolving on a daily basis. So every day I wake up in the morning and I go, I didn't think of this. That means that yesterday I was an idiot, okay? And as long as you start to realize that you need to learn more, right? And you build it into your behavior. You're learning on a daily basis. It's just the way you read a newspaper and you go, what am I going to learn about cybersecurity? How has it changed from yesterday? We're going to be in a better place. So let's consider that.
Amen. Amen, brother.
The choir say amen.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Ed. Angus, your thoughts?
Well, all the gentlemen, they covered a lot of areas that actually very much relevant in the context of how do we go forward. Based on what you were saying, the culture of cybersecurity, that's one of the things that we need to develop, to having everyone have that understanding that security is important, that we have to look at the organization, the requirements, and I know we spoke about it, what you are required to do, how you're required to function, why it is that we need to protect what we need to protect, and ensuring that your citizenry, your customers, that their information is safe, their privacy is safe, and they could function in an environment that the persons responsible for protecting these elements actually performing their due diligence, performing as they should, and sharing the information with who they need to share the information with, and actually sharing the knowledge, as we keep repeating here, we keep the knowledge sharing, and understanding that the risk to everyone is really, as I say, we have to kind of be our brother's keeper and actually perform with that in mind, so that we can actually care that actually we can protect the information, protect the systems, so that the region, not just Trinidad or not just any other country within the region, can move forward within this global environment, especially where digital transformation is so important. So that's where things like the legislation and the standards and the compliance and the reporting, all these things need to come together. As we say, we need a plan and we need to put it in action from everyone, and especially the leaders that have the responsibility to put these things in place. So that's my 2 cents in a sense.
Fantastic. Thank you, Angus. Thank you so much. Danielle, in cricket, we would refer to you as our tail ender. So
I'll try to wrap it up quick, because I know that we're already almost 2 hours running. I've been traveling and servicing the region since 2004 already. So I know the culture. I know the sometimes the reflex to please and to say, yeah, we'll take care of this. And eventually things get dropped to another priority. Not because people don't care about security or don't care about making things better, but I think at the end of the day, Ed, I think everybody talked about creating a culture where operating securely is part of the DNA of what you do. As same thing as when you drive a car, you're careful, you watch for trouble, you don't want to run across a pedestrian. You need to do the same thing while you're working within your business. And part of the leadership needs to instill that culture, part of what they want to have with their employees. This is how I see the region changing. I think that there is a will to do that. The know-how is not that different in the Caribbean than in Canada or in the USA. It's there, it's available. I think it's just to put the energy and the mentorship internally and externally to make things happen. And I trust that knowing the region how well, the way I know it, people will put the effort. It's coming. Because they want to feel that that stress that they're having at night will eventually disappear to a degree, because they know that their peers are actually watching over what's going on.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Danielle. And I want to just say on behalf of everyone that this was fantastic. The fact that we're actually 2 minutes away from 2 hours and 85 persons are still on, and persons deliberately ignore the time factor to stay back for the conversation, it says a lot. It says that this is a very, very topical issue today. And obviously there's a request for a part 2. So for all the attendees, there will be another one in the series for this. Anthony, Ken, Ed, Angus, Danielle, thank you very much. It was fantastic. You guys did a fantastic job. Anthony, you started it off. I'm going to give you, please, the opportunity to close this out, and then we can just bring it to an end.
Sure. So first I'd like to give thanks to the participants, but particularly to our panelists. When we came up with this particular series about how do we build resilience in the Caribbean, we felt that we needed the right, panelists to get the first program going. And I'm really happy these gentlemen accepted, and I think we have set the bar for the other panelists that are coming in. I want to assure the listeners that we, in fact, or viewers, that we, in fact, it's basically going to be every 2 months, we're going to be 2 to 3 months, we're going to bring in another program. The programs are going to be customized based on our understanding of the needs of the Caribbean. Is going to range around governance, return on security investment, leadership. We're going to spend some more time on leadership, all right, in terms of how we build the knowledge in the Caribbean. As a company, from a revenue perspective, the Caribbean plays a key part for us. But more importantly, as Daniel said, Hitachi's system security in its previous version of Above Security was one of the first few companies that moved into the Caribbean and saw the Caribbean as an opportunity in relation not only to build the business, but establish relationship around maturing a cybersecurity approach. And the company is very much committed towards that. We see huge opportunities, and in spite of all these issues that we presented, Ken and I have had these discussions many times, even when I was home. I think the reality is the Caribbean region has no choice now but to move towards a much more cybersecurity maturity, because COVID has brought that in that has to take us out of it. All right. So again, thank you, folks. Thank you to all listeners. And we look forward to more programs and more participation. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Okay, guys.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Take good care. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.